I'm assuming you can see me in the corner. Can't see you guys. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. My little gavel. My favorite part of being president. Let me just let a few more people in and we will get started. So welcome everybody. This is a very popular presentation. So this is great. We've got a lot of people joining us. So that's wonderful. And probably a few more will be joining as we work through this. So we are going to get started and we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So please join me in the pledge. So I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, now I'm going to see if I can mute y'all. Let's see if I can get my. I can't get it. Patrick, I think you're a co-host. Can you mute everybody?
I will try to do that. Let's see what happens.
I can't get to it. Or Bob Surridge, I don't know if you can. Okay, you muted? Okay, great. I think we're all muted. All right. And now, Pat Kirkman, if you could unmute yourself and get. I got muted too. Pat, if you could unmute yourself and give us our blessing.
Father God, we come to you with thanksgiving for this place where we live, for your many blessings to us. And we ask that you would continue to help us to live in safety and with serene surroundings that we enjoy so much. Bless this meeting, cause us to be in your service. Amen.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to mention this is our membership season, and we usually start asking for membership renewals in January. We try to get everyone renewed by the end of March. So if you've renewed your membership or you have a life membership, then thank you. If you've been meaning to send in your dues, then now is the time to do it. You can pay on our website at that address. There's a little link right on the very first page, or you can mail us a check at our post office box. The dues are $15 for individuals, $25 for a couple, and $150 and $200 for lifetime memberships. So you may be wondering, well, what am I supporting when I pay those dues? Well, we're going to run through just a few of those things right now. First of all, we have a scholarship program. And in fact, the deadline for this year's scholarship is coming up in less than a month on April 17th. There's a 900-word essay on a choice of 2 topics. That's what the scholarship is based on. So if you know anyone who is a high school senior who is planning to go on to college, please let them know. We also have a lot of really interesting educational programs that we've going on so far this year. I'll just run through some of the ones we've done. In February, we were proud to be a sponsor of the 10th annual Brunswick County Black History Symposium, which due to COVID was still on Zoom for the 2nd year in a row. Not only was it an educational program, a community building program, it also is a fundraiser for the New Hope Clinic. So that's the clinic for people who in the county who do not have insurance. They provide medical treatment for them. So if you're so inclined, you can make a donation to the New Hope Clinic. As part of that program, Society board member Donnie Joyner gave a presentation on Dr. Willie Evelyn's Reeves Turpin, who was born in Brunswick County in 1940. She grew up on a farm in Bolivia and attended Brunswick County Training School in Southport. She then went on to college and then to graduate school at Howard University, and eventually she became one of the first Black female dental surgeons in the country. So that was a very interesting talk that he gave. And then he gave another talk on about the U.S. Colored Troops Company B reenactors. They represent Black Union soldiers like Abram Galloway and Abraham Blunt, who are both buried in John N. Smith Cemetery. Donnie interviewed a few of the local reenactors, and these men were also models for Stephen Hay's statue Boundless, which is currently on display at the Cameron Art Museum in Wilmington. This picture you see here is a picture of that. Bob, can you put yourself on mute? I think that's you. Let me see if I can. Okay, great. This statue commemorates the Black soldiers who fought at the Battle of Forks Road, which is very near to the location of the museum. So if you are up in Wilmington or you want to make a trip up to Cameron Art Museum, I really recommend that you take a look at this statue that's on display there. As usual, the weekend ended with the Old Time Gospel Fest hosted by Mrs. Gwen Weirin. And despite the fact that it was on Zoom instead of in person, it was still a big success and a wonderful experience. We're really hoping that next year it will be in person again. Probably the most talked about presentation was Ms. Carolyn Evans, who portrayed Mamie Till Mobley, the mother of Emmett Till, the 14-year-old boy who was brutally murdered in Mississippi in 1955. Following his death, his mother channeled her grief over his death by going back to school, becoming an educator, and working with children, teaching them to perform programs where they recited, among other things, Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. So as part of the program, we asked some Brunswick County students to recite an excerpt from the speech. So all of those programs that I mentioned from the Black History Symposium, they were all recorded. They're all available on YouTube and Facebook pages, including the video of the children as a standalone recording. So it's very heartwarming. In addition to that, we had quite a few educational programs so far this year. We had Mike Royal and Ronnie Shannon share stories of their wonder years growing up in Southport and on Oak Island in the 1950s and 60s. Donnie Joyner shared the life story of Ms. Cora Lee Green, who graduated at the top of her class at Brunswick County Training School. She went on to become one of the first Black registered nurses in Southport. She became the first Black female member of the Brunswick County Community College Board of Directors, and she was awarded the Order of the Longleaf Pine, which is the top honor that can be bestowed upon a citizen of North Carolina. Ms. Alexis Graves spoke about Black education in the years following the Civil War and into the 20th century. She talked about Anna Jeans and the Jeans Fund. And then she also shared the life story of her aunt Miriam Gore, who was one of the first, or probably the first, Black Southport women to obtain a college degree. She shared stories of triumph and setbacks for her aunt Miriam. And then the ever popular Desiree Bridge started a new quarterly program that will focus on historic cooking. So the first session focused on sweets and how our ancestors during colonial times or times of war were able to obtain sweeteners for their food. And lastly, Bob Surridge started the kayak season with a return to paddle through history as a guide with the Adventure Kayak Company. So we had all that going on, and that's all sorts of things that your membership dues help support. But our biggest program in March was our series of events related to the sinking of the SS John D Gill. So we're really making an effort to engage the younger generation in local history, like you saw having the children participate in the Martin Luther King speech. We're also starting to partner more with the local high school. So in March, I taught 2 sessions of an AP history class about the history of the John D Gill. And I gotta say, it was my first in-person programs that I had done since before COVID. So it had been 2 years since I presented in person. Plus, I don't remember the last time I'd spent that much time with teenagers. But the students were an absolute delight. They paid very close attention. They asked good questions. They were amazed at the local history, and they were really charming. So I can't wait till we can do more of that. I also did an armchair history program that went into the events in detail, and the recording of that program is on Facebook and YouTube, and you can watch it there. And of course, we recently held our live in-person program that commemorated the 80th anniversary of the event and celebrated the men who served on the ship, the survivors, and those who didn't survive, and also celebrated the Southport hometown heroes who stepped up to care for the injured and to bury the dead. Several of our speakers had grandparents and other relatives who were personally involved in the event and in World War II. We had 6 tables set up of educational displays and 2 original artworks created by society members, including this pastel painting created by Tim Turman, which is now a permanent part of the Southport Historical Society collection because he donated it to us. So again, trying to raise awareness of local history in the next generation, we asked members of Scout Troop 1776 to lead the Pledge of Allegiance for our program, and the South Brunswick High School Brunswick Bellas to sing songs from the 1940s. So they sang for about 10 or 15 minutes before the program started. During the program, they sang the Merchant Marine song, which they learned especially for our program. And then it was a very, very cold day, but you can see in this picture, here they are standing out by the waterfront, singing the national anthem and trying hard in the 25-mile-an-hour winds to keep their skirts down. And they did a very good job. All those programs are recorded and are available on website and YouTube. So, let's see. Members of the Richard H. Stewart Jr. American Legion Post number 543 provided the color guard and a bugler who played taps for the event. And members of the U.S. Coast Guard station on Oak Island laid a wreath on the monument by the waterfront. We ended the program with a bang when members of the Smithville Guard fired a salute to all of those who have lost their lives at sea. So the support from the community was fantastic. Despite the abnormally cold and windy and rainy weather that day, the program was standing room only at the community building, and most of the people came down to the waterfront to see the outdoor portion. We received a lot of good feedback about how much people enjoyed the program. So we'd like once more to thank our sponsors whose donations made the event possible. And one thing we found is that we left the wreath up for about a week at the memorial, and it seemed to draw more attention. More people came by and read it and really kind of engaged with the monument. So we're thinking that it would be a good idea for the Historical Society to put a wreath up several times a year, maybe Memorial Day, Veterans Day, maybe 4th of July, at the monument for a few days each time to draw attention and to help people notice the monument more. Okay, and now for the final event in our month-long commemoration of the SS John D Gill. I want to present our guest speaker tonight. Tonight's program is funded by a grant from the Brunswick County Arts Council and the North Carolina Arts Council. And so I'm pleased to introduce to you Patrick Edall of Salty Shutter Photography to tell us the rest of the history of the John D Gill. For the past 80 years, the ship has been lying 95 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic. Patrick Edall is an underwater photographer who has been diving and photographing the wrecks off of North Carolina for the last 12 years. He has dived the wreck of the SS John D Gill multiple times and has interesting information and photos to share with us. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Patrick.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Liz. Let me see if I can get my screen share up and running. And if you could also confirm that this looks good on your side, we'll get started here.
Okay, yep, it does. It looks good.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, again, thank you so much, Liz, and the Southport Historical Society for inviting me to join all of you today. I think Liz reached out to me back in May. I've been looking forward to this conversation since that time. So try to have a little bit of fun over the next 20 minutes or so as I go through my photography of the wreck. I know this group knows a lot about the John D Gill and its history, but today I'm going to be talking about the wreck as it exists right now, sitting in 95 feet of water, 25 miles off the coast of North Carolina. I have one goal for this conversation, and it's to convince all of you on the call that the John D. Gill and the waters of North Carolina are home to one of the greatest natural ecosystems found anywhere on planet Earth. I know that's an ambitious goal, especially for anyone who sat on the beaches of North Carolina and has looked out at the expanse of kind of murky green water. So to reach that goal, I'm going to need all of you to trust me a little bit. And in order to trust me, I'm going to need to tell you just a little bit about myself before we jump into the wreck of the Gill. So as Liz mentioned, I run a business called Salty Shutter Photography, and the purpose of this business is simple. It's to try to share the underwater world with as many people as I can through sharing my photography and through conversations like this one. I've been diving for around 12 years now. I've been taking photographs underwater for almost that entire time. The photograph on the right was from a couple of summers ago, right off of North Carolina. This is a sand tiger shark on the wreck of the Aeolus. So, that's where we are today, or where I am today. Definitely didn't start here. It actually started back here. So this is a picture of me on my very first scuba dive down in Key Largo, Florida. I had no idea what I was doing, which you can kind of get the sense for in the photo itself. But what I was seeing and experiencing through my mask changed my life. Being in the water, breathing underwater, seeing the colors, seeing the fish, seeing the reef, and just the whole experience kind of opened up a new world to me that I didn't know existed, and certainly not a world that I thought I could be a part of. And so anytime you see something really cool, what do you want to do? You want to share it with your friends, with your family, and you want to tell people about it. And usually you do that through photos. And so right after this dive, I thought I have to get a camera. I have to show people what it looks like down here. I have to convince them to come join me and check this out. This is incredible. And so I started to take pictures, and I started to travel and started to dive everywhere I could. Anything that I could dive, I would dive it and take pictures along the way. And I was seeing these amazing, beautiful underwater reefs and fish and life and so many amazing things. And then I would come back on the surface and I would describe them to my friends and my family, and I would say, look what I saw. And then I would show them the pictures that I was taking, and they looked like this. So this was the typical picture that I was taking 12 years ago. Didn't stop me. I put together slideshows and make my parents sit through them of hours of photos that kind of looked like just murky green or murky blue water. No one is getting off their couch to get in the water. No one really believes you when you tell them about what it's like down there when you're showing them pictures like this. So I realized, hey, if I'm going to get people in the water, I'm going to need to start taking better pictures, because this is not doing it. So it's kind of started a little bit of a journey for me. And I started traveling more to some of the top dive destinations all over the world. I started to take more pictures, started to get a little bit better, inch by inch by inch, photo by photo by photo. Most of these are more recent. It's very much a journey in progress. So every time I go diving, I get to learn a new technique, learn a little bit more. I'm hoping 12 years from now, I'm going to look back at these photos and say, wow, those are terrible. I'm so much better. So I'm still on that journey today. And we're going to talk about the Gill in just a moment. But before we do, I want to just share with all of you the most beautiful thing that I've seen under the water so far. And that is, of course, my wife. So I met her 8 years ago. We've been diving together for 8 years. Most of the pictures that I've taken are because she's pointed something out to me. The way it works is when we go diving, she's always kind of finding different critters to take photos of, and I'm actually taking the pictures. So most of the credit goes to her. Okay, so let's talk about North Carolina. The first time somebody showed me a picture of North Carolina underwater was before I had even gotten scuba certified. And they showed me a picture, and it had vibrant colors to it. There were fish, it was blue water, it was clear. I said, hey, that's great, but that's not North Carolina. I've been to the beach. I know what it looks like. That's a photo of the Caribbean. But it turns out they were right. So I started diving North Carolina the very first summer. I got my scuba license, have been diving it ever since, because it's what's out there is just absolutely incredible and unique and can be found nowhere else. The picture on the left here is a photo of the spar, which sits off of Morehead City. This is one of my favorite pictures that kind of captures the atmosphere of the wrecks off of our coast. But there's 3,000 shipwrecks, or over 3,000 shipwrecks, that are estimated to be off of the coast of North Carolina. Of all of that, or of those 3,000, only a small fraction are actually visited by scuba divers. The reason that number is so small is twofold. So one, a lot of the wrecks are actually just beyond recreational diving limits. So it takes a lot of training and experience and really, really good weather to get out to them. Or two, and more commonly, we're just losing them to time. So over time, these wrecks are breaking down through hurricanes or disappearing under shifting sand. So there's actually a very small fraction of the total number of wrecks that are out there that you can dive and actually go and see. And one of the things that I came to realize is this number gets a little bit smaller every year. So every year, wrecks fall apart a little bit more. Another hurricane comes through and covers another one up with sand. And so one of the projects that I've been working on is trying to photograph all the wrecks that are out there today, and so that we have a record of them. If you go on the internet and you look for pictures of a lot of these wrecks, they just don't exist. And that was something I realized. So I've been trying to visit all of the different wrecks, take pictures of what they look like, what they are, all the life that's on them, so that people can see that before they disappear under the sand. Well, okay, so the one wreck that we're going to talk about today is the John D Gill. As I've mentioned, and Liz mentioned, the Gill currently sits 25 miles off the coast. It's about an hour-and-a-half boat ride if you're going out there as a diver. It's at a depth of 95 feet. 95 feet, if you are a calm, relaxed diver with a normal tank of air, that's going to last you around 50 minutes. So each time you go on a dive, you get to spend 50 minutes down on the wreck. It's one of the biggest wrecks off of North Carolina, or actually anywhere, at over 500 feet long, and it's divided into two sections, which we'll talk about in a minute. The photo on the left is a picture of the bow of the wreck. So if you were to sit on the sand and look at the front of the Gill, this is what you would see. You can actually see the dive boat and a couple of divers coming down if you look towards the top of the image. So I mentioned that the Gill sits in two sections. So these are the two sections. You have the bow, which is much more intact. It looks like a ship. And then you have the stern, which is more of a debris field and much more broken up. But if you're coming down the anchor line on a good day and you have blue water, this is the sight you're going to see as you're descending down to the Gill. Because it's so big, you're typically going to dive the wreck in two dives. It would be very hard to see both sections at once. They actually sit quite far apart. As folks may know, as the Gill was sinking, I think the torpedo that hit it was in the middle of the ship, and so as it sank, it broke in half, and the two sections of the Gill came to rest a couple hundred feet from each other. And so the last time I was there, knowing that I was going to do this presentation, I wanted to get photos of where it actually split open. And this is a picture of the breaking point of the wreck. So this is actually where the wreck snapped in two. If you were to swim up the left-hand side, or the port side, I should say, of this image, you would reach the bow. And there's a grouper that's coming to visit. But this is actually where the ship broke apart, which I thought was pretty neat. Okay, so if you're on the wreck and you're diving the Gill, a couple of things that are easy to identify and pick out. One is going to be the anchor winch. Almost every wreck that is out there, you can find this. So it's one of the most identifiable pieces of a ship. And the reason that is one, because it sits up high, so it's at the top of the bow at the front of the ship. And so even as the ship collapses, this usually is sitting on top, so you can always find it. And then two, it's made out of a much heavier metal, so it doesn't rust away nearly as quickly. It's going to be here for a very long time. If you're looking at the anchor winch, of course, there's an anchor. And so if you drop over to the port side of the wreck, you can find the port side, or the aptly named port side anchor. If the image on the left is the anchor itself, it's half buried in the sand. And then the image on the right is the actual anchor chain. There's a lot of life on the chain itself, so it's hard to make out, but you can actually see the individual links of the chain dropping off of the anchor there. Hey, one thing that's a little bit unique about the gill that I've noticed in my time diving on the wreck is it is covered in sea fans. A lot of the wrecks off of North Carolina have sea fans on them, but the gill has this one particular species that's featured on the left-hand side that is just prolific on the John D Gill, and you just don't see it nearly to this extent anywhere else. One of the things that's really interesting when you're diving is this sea fan actually looks black and white when you're looking at it, and then when you take a picture, it lights up with this vibrant red color that only reveals itself through photography. So it's one of the things that makes photography, underwater photography, a lot of fun. Is you can look at a very kind of still looking image and take a picture, and with the light, suddenly it comes to life with a ton of vibrant colors. A couple other examples of the sea fans that are covering the wreck. I think these are called deep water sea fans, and there's a grunt that's coming to check these ones out. So as I mentioned, the wrecks off in North Carolina are slowly falling apart. So on the gill itself, there's very limited areas where you can go inside the wreck and swim through the wreck. There are a couple of sections, they're pictured here. All of these are on the bow, but over time, these sections are falling apart, and this probably won't be possible in another couple of decades. And what's actually happening is, as the sides of the wreck kind of rust away, they fall over and then the decks collapse on themselves. And so over time, you move from a wreck that has a lot of open rooms and swim throughs to a wreck that's much more compressed and compact. But as that process is happening, it's also growing more and more life. So the older wrecks have the most life on them. The newer wrecks will have the most kind of open spaces to swim through. Here's a picture of the side, so you can see kind of that the process in play as the rust kind of eats away at the sides of the wreck, but also all the growth that is taking place. So as these wrecks off North Carolina start to collapse, the pieces that stick around the longest are pieces of the engine. So on almost every wreck you can visit, you can find the boilers. I think the boilers are going to be here forever because they look like almost brand new when you go to visit them. The gill's no exception. So when you're diving the stern, there's a ton of machinery that sticks out. And like, if you kind of wiped all the life off of it, would probably still function today because it isn't going anywhere anytime soon. This is I think a picture of a giant mechanical gear that was coming out of the sand. I couldn't tell you what the gear does, but I know that. I should fully disclose, I'm not an expert on 1940s marine ship engines. If these were camera parts, I could tell you what all of them were. Unfortunately, they're not. So you have to bear with me a little bit. The way I figured this out is you kind of describe what you're looking at, and then you ask the people on the dive boat, hey, this is what I saw, what was it? And they give you like 4 different answers. So I'll try to tell you what each of these parts are as I go through. But on the left-hand side, I think this is going to be the drive shaft for the propeller, or the prop shaft for the propeller that would connect the engine to the prop itself. The right-hand side I've debated. This may be a boiler. I don't think it's quite large enough, so I'm not quite sure what it is. Maybe someone on the call can help me out afterwards. I think this is an engine block, but just covered in life, very colorful. I think this is about 10 or 12 feet tall, which is hard to tell from the photo itself. This one I've gone back and forth. I think it may be a piece of the mast. It may be another part of the propeller shaft itself. It sits on the more towards the bow. So I think the jury's out on what we're looking at. The one piece of the engine that I have been able to identify is also the most unique piece of the gill. So I believe the gill was unique in that it was one of the first ships to be powered by an electric motor. And so what you're looking at here is the electromagnetic component of that electric motor. So this is a close-up shot. This is a little bit further back, but this is a huge piece. It's probably 10 or 12 feet across, that's half buried by the sand. So one thing that I hope folks have noticed as I've gone through the wreck is that every inch of this wreck is covered in life. You cannot find a single piece of the wreck that doesn't have something living on it. Everything under the sea has figured out a way to make the gill its home. And that's what makes these wrecks so beautiful to go dive, is just to see how much life has come to make to make what used to be a ship that's now sunk with just a huge variety of new life that's come to call it home. And the reason that this is unique for North Carolina is if you think about a reef in the tropics, fish have hundreds of miles of reef to hang out on. But if you're off of North Carolina, it's an expanse of sand. The bottom is largely sand. There's a couple of rocky ledges, but for the most part, it's flat sand. And so there isn't as many there are not as many shelters. There's not as many places where corals can attach and grow. But wrecks are the one place that they can. So as these wrecks fall, corals can attach to the hard substrate. The corals bring in life, such as fish and bigger fish. And so the wrecks kind of act as these oases that sit in the middle of an otherwise empty expanse of sand. And so when you're diving a wreck, you see far more life in a concentrated area than you would ever see on any reef that you can find in the tropics. So that's a lot about the wreck itself. I want to talk about what's around the wreck. So as you're diving the gill and the other wrecks off of North Carolina, you will almost always find these guys. These are Atlantic spade fish. They look like kind of dinner plates. I call these almost like the guardians of the wrecks of North Carolina. Every single wreck has spade fish on it, and they just kind of hover there. They watch you. They're always present, and they have this almost like eerie appearance to them as they drift through the wrecks. So they can be above it, inside it. You can find them everywhere. The other guardian of the wreck that you can always find on the gill, this is going to be the Great Barracuda. I've been diving all over the world, and all over the world, people get excited to see barracuda. And when they're excited, it's usually because they found a barracuda that looks like this or this big. When you go off of North Carolina, they're 4 or 5 times that size. They're these massive, massive creatures that can form in giant schools off of these wrecks. And when you're diving with them, they can go from these brilliant silver colors to instantaneously they'll turn their entire skin black as their hunting behaviors change. So it's always a pleasure to see these on the wreck. They're not a fan of the camera, so these shots work hard to come by. One of the most common animals that you can find on the wreck, if folks want to take a guess at what they're looking at here, you may find it on your dinner plate. This is actually a flounder. So this is a flounder eyeball that was looking at me through the algae growing up on the kind of deck of the ship. Right before flounder season opens up, when you're diving along the gill and the other wrecks, you will see the sand move as you move, as all the flounders kind of flurry away from you. Because the sand is so thick with flounder that they almost, layer. There's more flounder than there is sand at the bottom. If you're looking in the sand, the other animal you're likely to see when you are diving out here is going to be the southern stingray. So these are oftentimes buried in the sand, and as the flounders are moving, these take a little bit more motivation to move, so they'll actually let you come up and photograph them as they're hiding. And if you're not looking at the sand and you're actually looking into the water column, you can find all sorts of jellyfish floating by. So I think the bottom right here is the one that folks will be most familiar with if they've ever walked along the beach. That's the Cannonball Jellyfish. These are the ones that always wash up. You got a moon jellyfish on the right-hand side, which was actually on the gill a couple summers ago. And then in the center, jellyfish I have not been able to identify, but one of my favorite photos that I've taken. in the less attractive category of things that have made the gill their home is the oyster toadfish. This is one of the ugliest fish, in my opinion, that's out there, but they do find their way into every hole and crevice on the wreck. So you always see them every time you dive. You can find one, you can find 10 oyster toadfish if you're looking for them. So to set the scene, you have this brilliant wreck covered in life, loads of just massive variety of sea life all around it when you're diving. But that is actually, not the reason that North Carolina is unique. The thing that makes North Carolina diving unique and incredible is the sand tiger shark. Sand tiger sharks can be found year-round off of North Carolina. They actually move from wreck to wreck to wreck. So sometimes you'll find them on the gill, sometimes you'll find them on other wrecks. You'll find them in different numbers in different years. Some decades they loved one wreck, other decades they seem to have moved other ones. Right now, the biggest aggregation of sand tigers is up off of the Outer Banks on a wreck that's escaping my recollection right now, but that might change in the next couple of years. So you never know what you're going to see. You do see them very frequently on the John D Gill as they've made that wreck their home. So a couple other images of sand tigers. These are all younger sand tigers. I love photographing these animals. One of the things that makes them unique is they actually are the only shark that breathes air or can breathe air. So it'll go up to the surface and it'll take a gulp of air, and then it uses that air to maintain neutral buoyancy in the water column. And what that means for me as a photographer is that most sharks are swimming around very quickly, and it's really hard to take images of them. But sand tigers kind of lumber around, and they almost, I describe them as underwater cows because they're so gentle and calm, and you just kind of see them float by, and you can get up, they do not mind you coming up, getting up close and personal with them. All of these are younger sand tigers, which are curious. So they come right up to your camera to see what you're doing, check you out, makes for amazing photography, but an even more incredible experience to be in the water with these animals. The thing, being in the water with one sand tiger is an incredible moment, but North Carolina is the only place in the world that I know of where you can be in the water with hundreds of them at the same time. So off of the coast of North Carolina, sand tigers will form these giant aggregations called shivers. And so you'll get in the water and you'll realize like, hey, you'll be diving along and you're like, oh, it must have gotten cloudy. And you look up and there'll be 100, 150 sand tiger sharks above you in these massive schools, and they're just kind of floating, they're drifting silently. They're not aggressive. They're not, it feels very calm and just a very awe-inspiring moment to be in the water with those creatures. And when they're forming aggregations, they're generally fully grown. So there are these massive female sharks that are out there. So a couple more photos of the sand tiger aggregations, but being in the water, diving with this number of sharks in this formation, this is the best dive you can do anywhere on the planet. I've slowly worked my way through the list of the top places to dive all over the world. This is the best dive you can do. I don't think there's anything else out there that quite compares to being in the water with these animals. And the fact that they've selected the wrecks of North Carolina as their home on the East Coast, I think is really cool. So a couple more photos here of the sand tigers. I think this is one of my favorite shots that I've gotten alongside this one here as well. So, people will say, oh, that's an amazing photo, but really when you're in the water with these animals in this environment, it's hard not to take a bad picture. I'm excited every time I get in the water to see these guys. The one thing that happens is I go through my air about twice as fast as I should because I'm just so excited to be in the water taking pictures of them. So sand tigers are incredible, amazing. They're the reason to come dive North Carolina, but they're not the coolest animal that's out there. They're not the coolest animal that's on the gill. That award goes to my favorite creature underwater, which is of course the sea slug. So there are a couple of species of sea slugs that you can always find on the wrecks off of North Carolina. These are two of them, but they're called Nudibranchs. Nudibranchs come in, every shape and color imaginable. I've got more examples here, but the Nudibranchs are distributed through oceans all over the world. They're my favorite animal to photograph, largely because they're slow and they don't move, so it makes photography a lot easier. But the vibrant colors are to alert predators that they're poisonous, but there's so many toxins. I don't think we have a good understanding today of which are toxic and how toxic they are. But seeing them on a dive is a joy. My wife, she knows if I find a nudibranch that she's just going to go off on her own because I'm done. I'm going to be sitting there with it, watching it for the rest of the dive. The other animal that I love to photograph that has made the wrecks of North Carolina its home is the frogfish. This is probably my other favorite creature to find underwater. The reason frogfish are so brilliant is you can come right up next to them and photograph them all you want. And the reason that is because they think they're invisible. So they're masters of camouflage. They will, when they find a spot that they like, they will slowly change their coloration to match their environment, a process that takes a couple of weeks. And once they've done that, they're going to sit there and they've got a lure that they extend. You can actually see it laying on the top of its head here. And they'll use that to lure in fish. And then the fish will come in to check out the lure, and then it just lurches itself upwards in quick motion and will eat the whatever's come to check it out. But off North Carolina, you can find every variety of frogfish, or every coloration, I should say, of frogfish. These are two. The one on the right was actually right underneath the portside anchor on the gill. The one on the left is probably the coolest, well, I think the most brilliant one I've ever found. This was on the hide, which is just a couple of miles away from the gill. A couple other examples here. Again, on the left, this was on the gill. But if it's a color, you can find a frogfish that has that coloration. So just one of my favorite creatures to photograph. So hopefully setting a little bit of the scene here, you've got sharks, you've got these brilliant colored animals, you have the coral and the life that's made the wreck its home. But one of the things that really makes North Carolina unique is that you never know what you may end up in the water with. So everything I've discussed so far, you can find, on any day that you choose to dive. But anything that lives in the ocean might show up off of North Carolina. And so a couple of examples of that. One, the Atlantic stingray. These I've had the pleasure to dive with just a handful of times that I've seen them show up, but they're like, 5-8 feet across. And this one, I think, just let me come up right next to it. So I was laying in the sand a couple inches away and just photographed it for an hour, and then went back up to the surface. It's about 2 feet thick, which you can't really tell, but it's just a massive, massive creature. It's not the only ray that'll show up. On several occasions, we've had mantas show up off of North Carolina. I think this is I believe it's an oceanic manta, or at least I want to think that, which is the largest species of manta ray. Here's a close-up of a different one that showed up last summer. Had dolphins show up on the gill as a very frequent encounter. I've been in the water with them just once. This is not a picture of the dolphins on the gill, but it is kind of representative of what I actually saw when I was there. On one occasion, I've seen a humpback off of North Carolina. So they do move through. Wanted to bring that up just to show the diversity of life that can pass through on any given day. To really sell the point home, in 2012, I wanted to see a mola mola, and the only place that you can see, or one of the few places in the world that you can see mola molas, are in Bali, Indonesia. So I traveled to Bali. I went diving for a month, looking for the oceanic sunfish, looking for the mola mola. At the very end of my trip, after a month, I finally saw one. Went back home that same summer. Mola mola showed up off of one of the wrecks off of North Carolina, off of a small little tugboat about 8 miles away from the gill, which was just incredible to me that I had to travel all that distance to go see something that ended up showing up right in my backyard anyways. So I'll say it again, the wrecks of North Carolina just I think are one of the standout examples of nature that exists on this planet. I hope that I have convinced folks on the call that that is the case. I hope maybe some of you will put on a wetsuit and get out there and come see what I'm talking about if you haven't already. But otherwise, thank you very much, Liz, for inviting me on the call. I hope people enjoyed this. If you want to see more of my photography, I have a website, always adding more photos from all over the world, plus especially from North Carolina. I've got trying to document all of the wrecks off the coast on my website, so you can go see more photos, especially of the Gill. I've got a bunch on there. So otherwise, I think that's going to conclude my presentation. Happy to take questions, or Liz, I don't know what how we're doing on time or what the schedule is, but that wraps up my content.
Great. We do have a couple questions. Do you want to stop sharing your screen, maybe?
Yeah, I can do that.
I mean, your photos are great, but some people can see each other.
Yep.
We had a couple comments. I don't know that you could see them while you were doing that. Let me see. Why am I not seeing them? Well, here they are. Okay, I found them. Okay. So we have a question from Mark and Cheryl. Do you use digital or analog film in your photography, and what brand of camera?
Yeah. So I shoot with a Nikon camera that's digital. I could not afford to shoot with an analog camera. One of the things that's allowed me to get better with photography is just being able to take a lot of bad pictures. So for every photo I've showed today, there are thousands of pictures that are not good that I've kind of worked my way through.
Great. And then Henry Livingston says, outstanding, thank you. Desiree says, that was great, thank you. And it looks like Jake from Old Baldy has his hand up. So if you want to take yourself off mute, Jake, did you have a question?
Well, first and foremost, I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation. It was fantastic. And this is a pretty vague question, but I am just a little bit curious. And I apologize for not being on camera, but I'm actually on my cell phone. If you could just choose one wreck that may or may not have been lost to time, or it's too deep, or it's too far out, do you have one of those wrecks that you've never gotten to and it's like your ultimate dream to get to?
That's a great question. I have a list. So of the 65 that sit off of North Carolina, I've only been to about half of them. So it is an enormous effort to, you have to get a combination of good weather, luck, and a boat full of people who also want to go to them. I think the one wreck that I'd love to go see one day would be the Queen Anne's Revenge Blackbeard ship, which sits in the inlet off of Beaufort. So you can actually go see it. You do need a permit to dive it. And I think there's a wait list, and you're really just gonna be looking at sand, but I think it'd be a really cool moment to go see that.
So are you on the wait list?
Yeah, I signed up for the wait list, I think 10 years ago, and I have not heard back yet.
Okay, so Ingrid says, amazing. I can't wait to share this info with family members who dive all over the world, except in North Carolina. They dive places like Bali, St. Kitts, etc. LCT has a question. Do you want to take yourself off mute?
Yeah, thank you. I dive, and I went one time in North Carolina off of Moorhead.
Okay.
And it was a wreck dive, and it was a wreck that was in the shallowest water possible. And it was the worst dive I have ever done. It was a terrible current, so that, you had the line going down, but that was really scary. Terrible visibility. And so that made me think I never want to dive in North Carolina. So, hearing you, I might change my mind. I'm not nitrox certified, so I thought I was pretty limited around here.
Yeah. You bring up a great point. Like, one of the things that I haven't spoke to is not most, but a lot of days do not look like this. Diving North Carolina is hard. A lot of days you're going to be sitting on the dock because you can't even leave the inlet. When you make it out, you may run into a day that sounds similar to what you had with high current, low visibility. But the days when everything comes together and you get good weather and you get calm water, you get blue water, those days are better than any days you can find anywhere else on the planet. I'll stand by that.
Patrick, I have a couple questions. Those slugs that you were photographing that were so colorful, do they look that colorful to the naked eye, or is it only because you're using the light from your camera?
So it depends on the depth. So anything you see in the shallows will have natural colors and will look as it looks as I shared. As you go down, you lose different colors as they're filtered out of the light spectrum. So I think red goes first. So the deeper you are, the less vibrant they appear. And that vibrance is only comes back through photography, or you can always bring your flashlight and you can bring it out that way.
Okay. Sharon says, thank you, Patrick, beautiful photos. My other question has to do with the John D Gill. I know had, like all the ships back then, had these giant screws that turned the propellers that kept the boat in motion. Are those gone? Have those disintegrated already? Or have you ever seen them?
So I think the one photo that I could try to share it again. So I think you're talking about a screw drive. Like
they're like great big propeller blades that were churning.
Oh, the prop itself?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the prop of the Gill, I believe, is buried under the sand. So I've never seen it. Okay. And that's very common because the wreck is going to settle. Usually, if it's settling upright, that's going to be the first thing that gets buried. So the wrecks that have the props exposed are typically going to be ones that are on their side or upside down.
Okay, that's interesting. Does anybody else have any questions for Patrick? Anything else? Okay, this was excellent. I really enjoyed this a great deal. Hopefully everybody else did too, but it was fascinating to me to see what's happened over time. And it was also very, I don't know, I really liked the fact that all that life had grown up around it and everything that happened in that time. So thank you very much for putting this together and for sharing this with us. This was wonderful.
Patrick,
Patrick,
thank you very much. Because one of the things that you didn't mention that you do is bring all of that wonderment to those of us who are never going to see it, on our own. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That's how I do it.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you. As Patrick said, he has a website if anybody wants to get one or more of his photos and hang them up in your house. He does have them there, so you can have your own memento of the John D Gill. Okay. Anything else? All right. Then, if there's no more questions for Patrick, Bob, do you want to talk about what our upcoming programs are before we meet again?
Sure. Upcoming for April and May, we have 3 programs coming in each month. On April 6th will be the 18th season that the old Brunswick County Jail Museum is open. And in the spring, the old jail is open 2 days a week. It's open Wednesdays and Saturdays from 12:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon. And I mean, all are invited to come and tour the museum. There are docents on duty who know their stuff and will be telling you some of the tales and things that have happened in the Brunswick County Old Jail since it was built in 1904. And I'm sure many of you know that it's on the corner of Rhett and Mass Streets in Southport. So that's the seasonal 18th season of the Brunswick County Old Jail and operated by the Southport Historical Society. On April 12th, the April Tuesday talk with Cindy Ramsey. And Cindy will talk about the book that she wrote, which is the boys of the battleship North Carolina. So she's not only telling a bit of the history of the North Carolina, but she'll be sharing stories from the men who were the crew of the North Carolina. And I just think that's that's fascinating to fascinating to hear their stories and the way they saw the world at that point. So that's on Tuesday, April 12th, and it's at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. April 25th, I'm going to do a paddle through history program, and this is in cooperation with the Adventure Kayak Company, and members of the Historical Society get a discount on the tour. And we'll be doing Sheep's Island, which is on the west end of Oak Island, and we'll be talking about blockade running, as there are 3 Civil War ships that are sunk right there in the Lockwood Folly, or close to the Lockwood Folly Inlet. 2 Confederate blockade runners and 1 Yankee blockader. So that's a Tuesday talk with Cindy Ramsey. April 25th is a paddle through history, and that's, as I just said, Sheep's Island. May 10th is another Tuesday talk with Pat Kirkman. And Pat, I know you're there, Pat. So
Yes, I'm here. Yeah,
you're gonna talk about the frying pan.
I am the frying pan. It's a good place to eat. No, it'll be about the frying pan lightship, the history of that ship that still exists, and folks are eating on it. Of course, I was being funny about the frying pan restaurant that we have here in town now, but we'll investigate the frying pan. So I hope you'll tune in on May 10th.
I think so. You're going to have to come in and hear that story firsthand from Pat Kirkman. Okay. On May 23rd is another paddle through history, and that one will take us to the Blackwater Creek, to Rice Creek, Blackwater Creek in Winnebago, and I'll be talking about the explorations done by William Hilton in his 2 explorations. First one in 1663 and the second one in 1664. Thankfully, William Hilton left to us not only the records of the ship's logs, but his personal reflections on his explorations of the Cape Fear region. And then on May 26th, our general meeting will be a celebration of the people who donated to our commemorative brick program, and also to the folks, or to the things that the bricks were commemorated for. I think that's going to be a fun event to have, and kind of highlights the people who help support the Southport Historical Society. And Mary Ellen Watts Poole, I bet you, is going to be the master of ceremonies for that program. So you want to be there. That's it.
All right. Does anybody have any questions about any of the upcoming programs? Mark and Cheryl, I don't know if it's Mark or Cheryl, but they said, I'll be on duty at the old jail on April 6th. Come see me. Most of the stories I tell are partially true. So you can get to the jail, here's some history, here's some lore. So, so that'll be good. Does anybody have any other questions or comments? Anything? Patrick, have you ever been to Southport?
I visited this summer to actually come and walk around. If you guys saw you have a building at the Southport Historical Society?
We have the old jail, and we're in the visitor center.
Okay. Yeah, so I walked around the waterfront, read all the plaques, everything, so it was great.
Very nice. Okay, well, if you come again, let us know, and we'll be happy to give you a tour.
We'll give you a complimentary tour of the old jail.
Sounds great.
And Mark will tell his stories twice because they're only half true the first time. We're all right.
All right, so if there are no other comments, can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting? Mary Ellen, I think motioned, and do I need a second? Doug? Okay, all right. Meeting is adjourned.